we've got to invest in the basics for data. We're nerds. I have a T-shirt that says "Wash Systems Nerd" on it somewhere. I'm not wearing it for this, talk.
Hey, look, Patrick, we celebrate nerds on the show, so nerd it up. Meeting SDGs in 2030.
Yes.
you don't have to agree.
Okay.
In fact,
the episode's
over,
guys.
I was trying to pass out the question in that.
So yeah, it's more of a commentary and looking. So that's a good point. It's more of a statement as opposed to a question, but. Hello and welcome to The Stream, an unscripted, unedited, free-flowing conversation featuring guests who reject the status quo with a bias for action in the world of water and beyond. My name is Tom Freyberg. I'm an environmental journalist and content creator specializing in water.
And I'm Will Sarney, a water strategy consultant, doing my part to solve wicked water problems.
And we are pleased and delighted to welcome Dr. Patrick Moriarty, who is the CEO of IRC. Patrick, thanks for joining us from Mali today, I believe.
Yeah, that's right. It's a pleasure. Really looking forward to the conversation.
Thank you very much. And we should note, this is the finale. We're ending on a high with the interview with Patrick, the final, but not the last, but no means least episode of season 4. So Patrick, appreciate you joining us. So lots we want to talk about. But I think we first met in Singapore, where you gave a wonderful, galvanizing, call to arms, almost a motivational speech that I felt definitely had the bias for action we look for as guests on the stream. And you pretty much kind of called out, I think, well, there's a few things we want to talk about. Firstly, the apathy towards water from governments, but also the fact is that actually when it comes to Sustainable Development Goal number 6, that means by 2030, all people have access to water and sanitation. We're quite far off the mark, and there's a few reasons why. So yeah, how was that, I guess, journey and event for you in Singapore, first of all?
It was a really interesting event, and it was, I think I was telling you before, or maybe when we were there, it's a little bit outside of the normal events that we go to. I mean, we very much, we're an NGO that specializes works almost entirely in less developed countries, in Africa, a little bit in South Asia, a little bit in Latin America. So, and Singapore International Water Week is very much the sort of the big global water and sanitation, water industry, really. Yeah, and we're very much what I'd call the wash sector, which is, if I'm being rude about it, which I often am, is the sort of less professional NGO, charity, UN-driven end of stuff, where we sort of think it's okay to give people second-rate things like hand pumps and pit latrines because, well, they're poor and they can't afford anything better. So why would we try to do anything different, right? Which isn't good. But I think increasingly in our work, we're saying, no, that's not good enough. We want to reach out to the sort of professional big utilities and people who you meet at somewhere like Singapore, and who you meet increasingly in the countries we work in as well, and say, come on, guys, the people, by 2030, we need to be offering people clean, safe water and sanitation, preferably in their houses, not hand pumps that they have to walk a kilometre to.
100%. Well, firstly, you said, you're often rude and honest about certain things. So please continue doing that for the next 30 minutes. That's exactly why we want to bring you on, for your honest commentary.
Yeah, Patrick, we'll get you all lit up in just about a minute or so on the topic, which is maybe a good segue into a question. So why the apathy? Is it because water's invisible? What's the issue here? And do you think you being in Singapore was an action to help address that apathy with respect to water?
Why is the apathy there? I'm not sure. It's a great question. It's one we ask ourselves a lot. And part of the, I mean, I think part of the problem, we in the water sector, the water and sanitation sector, are typically not apathetic at all. It's full of very passionate people. I think part of the problem is we spend far too much time talking to each other and not enough time talking to other folks, right? So that contributes to the invisibility. And in some ways, you know, as I say, I come from not the water sector itself has subsectors, and there's this little one called WASH, which is full of well-meaning folks. But you know, part of going to Singapore is talking to the bigger water sector. But we also I spend a lot of time trying to engage with health sector, education sector, other folks to make them care about WASH and to see why it's important to what they do.
So we operate in an echo chamber.
We definitely tend to operate in a bit of an echo chamber.
Right, which is, you know, why you're having a conversation with two water people.
Exactly.
Well, but you know, I want to run with this because, you know, Tom and I talk about it all the time. It's how do we engage different stakeholder groups on the issues of water, and really more importantly, you know, what are the solutions? I mean, the solutions are available. It's a matter of, you know, how do we scale? How do we get people to care? And, you know, we've typically brought in, historically brought in some sort of unusual stakeholders in the, you know, not in the world of water to really expand that base and get people to care about something that, you know, in my part of the world is, you know, essentially free and accessible. And, you know, I would say generally safe, but who knows?
Yeah, absolutely. And, you know, yes. I think that there's apathy about water in the developed world. You know, I live in the UK, like Tom. You turn on the tap, the water comes out, unless there's some sort of mega unusual extended dry period and they begin talking about hosepipe bans and people can't water their gardens and things. It's completely visible, right? Ditto for sanitation. Now, obviously, and so from a perspective of an NGO that fundraises to some extent in the north, in rich countries, that's an issue because a lot of folks, people just aren't aware that there's an issue. In poorer countries, in the countries where we work, most water is often an issue, or it's seen as an issue. But if you follow the money and you look at the investment, it's not getting up the kind of policy agenda along with other areas that tend to get a bit more traction with government, like, well, particularly education and health. Though I don't particularly like feeling like we're competing with health. We shouldn't be. Water, access to water and sanitation is critical. Right. It's a building block of health, right? You can't have public health without clean water and sanitation, which is the big lesson of COVID. And I think we all hoped at the start of COVID that would, as governments locked down and we're thinking, oh my God, how are we going to get people to wash their hands because we don't have a vaccine, there's nothing else to do. We saw the profile of water and sanitation begin to lift a bit, but then the vaccines came and it seems to have died off again a bit. So what triggers an interest in water sanitation is the $1 million question. And, you know, as well as being CEO of IRC WASH, I'm chair of something called Sanitation Water for All, which had another meeting in East Asia the month after Singapore. So I was back in Jakarta for that. And there, you know, we brought together more than 50 ministers of water and sanitation from around the world to talk about exactly this. How do we lift water up the political ladder? And Sanitation Water for All also tries to engage with ministers of finance on that. So you tell the story, the 4-to-1 return for every dollar invested in water brings a $4 return in economic development. But it is a constant struggle. And then every now and again, you have a big step forward where, you know, Narendra Modi decides actually, for whatever reason, I don't know what the reason was, but we are going to make every person in India have a latrine, which they argue about whether it was really achieved, but it was a huge political drive to do it. And that was then followed by a decision to everyone in India must have a drink from a tap. But it's almost that trigger, that is, I think we spend a lot of time looking for the magic bullet that's going to help us to unleash that, because we think where you see the massive progress, what you see in Singapore, you know, somebody when Singapore became independent said, we're going to be a modern state within 20 years, everyone's going to have water and sanitation, and they did it.
It seems it's a lack of valuing water as a strategic resource. And, we certainly see that in the US here, which is, climate change has impacted the American West in a significant way, yet we still don't have the political will to address the fundamental issues that, include access to safe water, sanitation and hygiene, depending on the communities. So it's, Singapore viewed it as a strategic resource, strategic issue worthy of changing public policy and making investments. But, they're the exception, not the rule. And, even here, we're tripping over ourselves to figure out how to deal with something that is, daunting.
It was a quote, Patrick, that you said that it's not just not enough people care, not enough, and in the article I wrote, of the right people care. And you referenced Modi in India, and I think in Singapore, from memory, it can be dated back to Lee Kuan Yew, right? One of the former prime ministers, and then they've gone on to have the Lee Kuan Yew Water Prize. So it almost takes that vision, as you mentioned, Will, to have water baked into the country's future strategy from the very top to then trickle down. So I guess the question from that gathering of 50 different ministers, which sounds amazing, by the way, in terms of influence, is how can the ministers get the buy-in from above themselves, right?
Well, I think that's again the million-dollar question, and I'm almost on the point of saying I agree, and I often, as in Singapore, I make the point: we need buy-in from the highest level. We need buy-in from the level of executives. And if I follow the last 10 years of my own experience of, first of all, thinking we needed to engage more with the ministers responsible for water or sanitation or hygiene, and sometimes it's three who do one, and sometimes it's spread over multiple ministries. And okay, so you get to them, and then you realize that they don't know how to money your power. So then you think, okay, well, like SWA, let's talk to the ministers of finance. And again, of course, all this stuff becomes incredibly granular and it's context specific, but in general, you realize actually ministers of finance can be an important gatekeeper, but they're typically not making those big decisions. So that brought us to say, no, actually, we really need to be targeting the prime ministers, the presidents, the absolute top. But I never say that it's just about a top down. I think you need to trigger the demand from the top. But we would always, in all our work in the countries where we have offices and in the Destination 2030 strategy that we developed with a US-based NGO who's also been on your show called Water for People, we really aim, to take what we call a systems approach and to work at all levels of the system. I think that's what I was talking about in Singapore. It's as much about proving what's possible and getting the mayor really excited about it, getting the mayor to believe that he or she is able to have a vision to get to universal access, as it is to get a president to have that same vision. And we feel that if you can prove something on the ground, that can contribute to getting the president's attention. But in the end, if you want to go to scale, you do have to have the president's attention as well.
Listening to your take in terms of strategy and how to get traction, it sounds somewhat like the private sector also, in that, if you look at the multinationals that are successful in terms of addressing water issues, not just for their own operations, but for communities and watersheds, if the initiative is embraced and funded by the CEO or CFO even, combined with that bottom-up workforce passion and commitment to it, you tend to have a more successful program in terms of actual impact. I wonder if there's a way to combine the private sector C-suite discussion with the discussions that you're having. Tom is smiling because this will just generate one more thing for us to do, but just kind of note, and Patrick, that's the relationship we have,
No, instantly I'm thinking about the logistics of not only bringing 50 ministers together, but together with presidents and the CEOs of multinationals. But as a concept, talk about scale and the ability to change, right? But I mean, Patrick, you referenced the Water for People collaboration that you guys have. And I think it's interesting when I was looking at, and you mentioned we had Eleanor Allen, phenomenal guest on the previous season, right? That we had a discussion with Eleanor about the mantra of Water for People, and that's everyone forever. And then I was trying to find the IRC mantra tagline, if you will, and it's supporting water, sanitation, and hygiene services for life. So there's definitely the common thread there is about capacity building for sustainable long-term water supply. And then when you look at your website, there was a really good pull-out quote that said, "Pumps break, but resilient systems keep the water flowing." So I think that's a nice part for the kind of next discussion, that, you know, the previous way of kind of having short-term projects or pumps are one thing, but actually educating, helping with cultural change, helping with training of workforce is probably the more important element here when you're coming to meeting SDGs in 2030.
Yes.
You don't have to agree.
Okay.
In fact, please.
The episode's
I
over, guys.
I was
That
trying
was
to
it.
pass out
Yes.
the question in that.
Sorry, yeah, it's more of a commentary and looking. So that's a good point. There's more of a statement as opposed to a question,
but I think I agree, and I think, you know, what Eleanor was saying on your talk is that we, you know, the reason that we created this alliance together is that over, you know, more than 10 years, I was incredibly excited by Everyone Forever and by Ned Breslin, Eleanor's predecessor, who was a good friend, you know, who coined that term. And at the time, we were very much working, you know, we're nerds. I have a T-shirt that says "Wash Systems Nerd" on it somewhere. I'm not wearing it for this, you know, call.
Hey, look, Patrick, we celebrate nerds on this show, so, you know, nerd it up.
So, you know, we're an organization of nerds that was, you know, doing policy research, national capacity building work, and, you know, we got to know Ned and subsequently Eleanor and Water for People and Everyone Forever and the district-wide approach that is behind that, which has become, you know, he's getting more and more adherence all the time, right? And I think that's what you'll find if you go to the Google Destination 2030 and download our strategy and theory of change. You'll see that's what it's all about. It's the sort of the bottom-up, district-wide approach, meets top-down policy, policy change, policy impact, looking for big financial solutions. So that's the whole thing. And I think really what it's about driving, what attracted me, you know, when you told me you'd like to talk to me on this, you know, it's about driving change. You know, we're not interested in incremental change, and so that's one of the things. Yes, we do work in typically a handful of districts in each country, but it's absolutely plugged into this model of testing and showing something that can work. And, you know, going back to where you were with the CEOs, Will, I mean, I was just here in Mali at a seminar that our country office has put on here, introducing the systems approach, and I was just giving a talk, and it was the systems approach and the importance of collective action to drive change. And your point about the private sector, yes, it's the private sector, it's research, it's NGOs, it's government. Government has a critical role to play in leading it, but we're absolutely trying to move away from the idea that government's going to deliver it all, because it can't. Government has a role to play. Now, if government doesn't open the gates, government doesn't deliver the drive, particularly because this is a public service, right, and a human right. So you've always got issues like subsidy and all the rest in there. But essentially, you know, where we see success, it's either through fully private initiative or it's through professionalized, corporatized public utilities. And what, you know, where we're not seeing anything lasting and getting over this huge sustainability challenge the whole wash sector has, it's where it's been delivered off the back of charity or community management on all the rest, right? So really our whole effort is to trigger, is basically we're seeking to create a movement for change that's based on collective action, that's based on government leadership, and that's based on a vision of universal access.
So Patrick, I don't know if you've heard us talk, but we talk about this quite often about, water is a wicked problem. It takes, and who solves wicked problems. And to your point, it really does require the public sector that has scale. They're slow, but they have scale. And then, the other end of the spectrum, which is, the entrepreneurs and investors and, multinationals and so on. So I completely agree with your view. But I'm going to go back to the idea about engaging the private sector, because there's a group that came out of the CEO Water Mandate, the Water Resilience Coalition. And I wonder, and they focus on key priority watersheds for the multinationals. And that was very much driven by a commitment from the CEOs that signed the mandate, but also actually put money behind and people behind targeting watersheds. I wonder if there's an overlap between what you're doing and what the mandate's doing with the Water Resilience Coalition, to get that overlay of, okay, yeah, these CEOs signed a commitment, and how do we get them, their counterparts basically in the public sector, to do the same thing?
So that's and that's a big part of what Sanitation Water for All is about, right? So Sanitation Water for All, I think, we have 300 plus members. We have more than 80 member states as members. Those were all the ministers we brought together. But we also we're divided into constituencies. So there's a government constituency. There's also private sector constituency.
Oh, okay.
There's civil society. But in fact, and I think we currently have a set integration to go to our Global Leaders Council, which has Alan Jope on it, CEO of Unilever. So, but I'm with you, and I think we need more of this sort of thing, and the whole process that SWA tries to ignite is driven by a process of making commitments. So yeah, it's this idea you have. Though typically, what we're seeking to do is have our national government members make commitments that are then supported by commitments from the other constituencies. But I think it's a super interesting idea, and one that we should be picking up.
Tom and I always like to have something that's actionable as a result of these conversations. So yeah, why don't we schedule a follow-up and see if this has legs, as they say, or if there's something that we can do in terms of increasing private sector engagement with what you're doing. Great.
There you go. There's definitely an action point to take away from the conversation. Patrick, you mentioned about creating this movement, right, and drive at scale. And we've talked about, and I think excuse me, I think some music's just played automatically from my Spotify. Great timing. Apologies for that. It's almost like we had some kind of musical background.
It's a sound, Patrick, it's a soundtrack designed specifically for you. So
there we go. Yeah, we had that composed beforehand, along with the police sirens that have just gone past. Look at that. But anyway, Patrick, you referenced Karabole in Uganda as a kind of example of, and you mentioned this districts-led approach where it's actually working, where you've seen success. So just, I guess, for the context and people listening, talk us through the kind of the process, how that happened. Like IRC, you had boots on the ground. You did get buy-in from investors in the private sector. I'd love to kind of hear more about that. So
Kabarole is a district in the Midwest of Uganda. If everyone's heard of the Ruwenzori Mountains, the Mountains of the Moon, it's right on the edge of those. It's a very nice place, kind of green and lush and hilly. And so that's one of what we call our partner districts. So when I said, based on sort of being inspired by Water for People and Everyone Forever, we've also begun to identify partner districts over the last kind of 5-6 years, and then go through a process with them that starts with, well, once we've gone and seen if they actually want us to come and work with them and all the rest, develop what we call a master plan. So that's all about bringing all the different actors who are present in that district together, doing a sort of asset inventory with them, doing a who has what, what's your current level of coverage, etc., etc. But most importantly, developing a reasonably high level vision of where they want to go, and critically, that's been led by, in that case, the chair of the council, but with us providing a certain amount of technical support to their services. So what comes out of that is this master plan, which is aspirational, which is high level, but which does, where we've been doing it, it's the first time that someone's actually sat down and said, what would it take to get to everyone, at least everyone. And then what we've been doing is seeking to get those financed, seeking to get those funded. So we did that in Cavarole, and I think the example that I was presenting in Singapore was showing that even where you don't bring in vast amounts of money, just breaking down some of the silos between all these different actors. So I had a map of the district, and it showed all the individual water points, the hand pumps that are there. It also showed some of these gravity-fed schemes that are there, and it also showed that there was the National Water Utility, National Water and Sanitation Corporation of Uganda. So they're all present, and you have this sort of mishmash across the landscape of different management models. Some have been run by the community, some have been run by these new rural utilities that have just been created in Uganda as a move towards professionalization. And that's typically some of those smaller pipe networks. And then you have national water. And the example I was giving was how we'd, to some extent, by just by bringing people together and creating that vision and getting people to begin to talk across institutional silos, we found opportunities to leverage some of the district investment that they had anyway in their national funds, to bring that together with money that National Water and Sewerage Corporation had, and to actually begin to extend their networks into areas they wouldn't have gone to before, particularly into some of the kind of rural areas immediately outside of the main town. So that to me was I was shown it in Singapore partly to say, hey, utilities, we need you to come and begin to provide professional services, and there is a business case for you to do so. But it was also to show what collective, proper collective action can do if you do get, even at the local level, that political leadership behind it, and you support that with a process of actually getting people to talk to each other and talk beyond their projects and their investment cycles and their one-year investment cycles to all own a bigger vision and to be excited and motivated by that.
Patrick, was data and information presented in a visually approachable way a key part of this in terms of getting people to come to the aha, I never knew that, or I never looked at it that way, and find that connectivity between stakeholders?
Absolutely. And I mean, a lot would, simple, just GIS overlays, just saying, guys, this is where the stuff is. And I mean, I've spent a lot of our organization spent a lot of the last 20 years doing the asset inventories, going out and doing water point mapping, and it's extraordinary how little of that there is. I mean, I think one of the, again, not the wash sector, the water and sanitation and hygiene sector in developing countries driven by NGOs and charity is a data desert. No one knows where anything is. And as you say, water is a wicked problem. Water is a wicked problem on a good day. Water is a wicked problem when you have millions of sensors and data everywhere. And I spent most of my professional career working in places where there's actually no data. And there are some really interesting initiatives at the moment to do something about that. But so often just going out, collecting some data, or helping our partners in the district government, the district engineer, to go out and collect data and create an asset inventory and create a simple GIS to keep that in. That already unlocks, as you're saying, right. And then presenting that to people and saying, hey, this is where you have some gaps. This is where no one's been served, but what have you extended your pipeline there by a few kilometers. How many people do you think we could serve like that?
That's interesting. Again, I refer to the private sector. I mean, we're seeing that be an important lever in getting multinationals to talk together, talk to one another and cooperate, but also engage the public sector on, watershed health, community engagement, things like that. That's interesting. It was good.
I think it's one of the biggest, for me, it's, and we're seeing it change rapidly, right? Because cheap phones, bright young kids coming out of the universities and things like that. But still, I would say one of the biggest capacity gaps that we face is finding people who are comfortable working with and dealing with presenting data, and particularly presenting information. Actually, more and more people are so comfortable with Excel, but to get them to the next step to begin putting some of that data into a GIS, that's still a big jump. But it's transformative.
Right, it is transformative. Right, it's catalytic. It's interesting. Again, Tom and I have been increasingly focused on digital technologies, so remote sensing data and the ability of the startup community in digital water right now to provide data to both the public and the private sector in a way that is easy. You're not just collecting data on the ground, but you can access satellite data, and remote sensing data and put it in a visual format that the layperson can understand readily.
Yeah, and I think there's some really interesting. There are some people doing really interesting work in the wash space. M-Water, which is a platform that's I don't know if you guys have heard about, but being increasingly used, that's freely available, and people can use it to begin mapping their water points and things. And there's something called Water Data Point Exchange, WPDX, that's another. Both of those are coming from the States. Even in Boulder, you have a great group that we've Evan Davis, the Sweet Sense, who are, again, sensor-based technology.
Oh yeah.
In Ethiopia, right?
So Evan Thomas.
Sorry. Yes, exactly.
Yeah, no. Evan just had a successful, I want to say, seed stage raise, and I believe he rebranded. Also, he's got his philanthropic NGO business, Sweet Sense, and I believe he just rebranded the commercial side of it that got the raise. But from the minute I heard what Evan had done with Sweet Sense, it was really kind of jaw-dropping in terms of the ability to monitor remotely. Cook stoves, which is where he started, and then pumps. And if you think about where this could go, it really could be anything related to water infrastructure or agriculture and so on. So brilliant business on both the philanthropic side, but also on the commercial side.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think we did some work with Evan in, not me personally, but IRC in Ethiopia on that, exactly on the monitoring the pumps. And it has the potential to be transformative. I mean, and yes, we're still, I think, you could run into the same problems. GSM networks aren't quite there yet, maybe, and we need Elon to put up some more. Or get satellites quickly.
Patrick, he's busy with Twitter right now, so
exactly.
Still
might not be accessible.
Still driving down the price there, yeah.
But I've been in my sort of life, in my professional life in this sector, we've been from paper, collecting data on paper, and trying to deal with that, and putting that onto laptops, and then putting that onto floppy disks and sending that somewhere and it getting lost and consolidated. It was always, whoever has the data has a certain amount of control and is able to take a great story, but at all ages. And then we got to the stage of collecting the data on phones, and that's a huge step forward. But you're still having to pay someone to sit on a motorbike and drive to a water point and check whether it's working or not. And that's still just prohibitively expensive. So I think sensors is what's going to be the game changer, and the remote sensing stuff that you're talking about as well. I think World Vision are doing some super interesting stuff using remote sensing, identify where unserved populations are and things like that. So yes, it's a very exciting space at the moment. and has the potential to be quite transformative.
100%. It's not often I guess a lot of the conversations we have, Will, you hear of the phrase data desert. Often we hear from utilities and developed nations that complain about having too many data sources, or even internal teams between the clean water and the wastewater treatment side, and them not communicating over data. So actually, I think, as you rightly said, there's an opportunity for capacity building, but obviously as well, the role of startups in helping to kind of, I guess, quench this data desert challenge. So, and
to be honest, investment, part of our messaging, and again, this is the system strengthening messaging, particularly to external funding agencies, to the USAIDs and the World Banks and anyone else who listen, is it's fine to invest in building new infrastructure for water service delivery. That's essential, but we've got to invest in the basics for data. Because it is a desert. I'm sitting here in Mali and I'm talking with our colleagues here in government, and groundwater problems, but really very little idea of what groundwater is there, very little idea of who's drilling what where.
Right.
I think people are more or less uncontrolled development of boreholes all around Bamako. They think that that's leading to a lot of pollution, but no one really knows because no one's really monitoring.
Right.
So yeah, so I think this investing in data is a huge. If we want to transform, if the people who fund development want to support countries that are sitting right on the edge, on the hard edge of climate change, they've got, we have got to help them to be able to deal with a wicked problem. You've got absolutely, I mean, they're wicked when you know everything about them, right? So how do you address a wicked problem when you don't even really know, you don't know
how big a problem you've got, right?
How big a problem it is, yeah.
I wonder if there's, I guess, one more thing that we can chat about in terms of funding. So how do you get, other funding sources to support the data piece of the puzzle here, and then democratize access to the data across all the stakeholder groups? That way, there are those aha moments. There is wow, I didn't know that, and now I want to be part of the solution. So again, I think it's just something to noodle on a little bit, and potentially figure out where we can get additional sources of money from unlikely suspects in this, and bring them in.
I think so. Yeah. And look, I mean, I think you were talking about the CEO mandate, and the little bit I know about some of that work, and I know the sort of SAB Miller stuff, which was very interesting. But again, as you're saying, it's typically around, we have a problem around our bottling plant, or we have a problem, we want to make sure that we are looking at the watersheds that are providing, I don't know, our barley or our wheat or whatever it is that we're using, right? But so I think that's part of the solution. But what you tend to then have is I think you get these sort of islands of great data where somebody cares enough to go and collect it, and almost, the private sector is interested to be on top of that data, so they begin to deliver it, and with a bit of luck, they then share it. But in between that, where it's not particularly interesting for them, how do we fund that piece? How do we and the sort of stuff that is provided by, I don't know, the British Geological Survey in the UK, or people who are just providing that baseline of data for a country that everyone else is able to draw on as a public good.
I think we've got at least 2 to 3 action items out of this. So Patrick, you're good.
Good stuff. Well, listen, Patrick, really appreciate your time and joining us to conclude the stream season 4. I think incredible work you're doing, and love the partnership and the synergy between IRC and Water for People as well, especially with that kind of capacity building strategy as well. So yeah, thanks for coming on, and good luck for your time in Mali at the moment, and continued progress as well. It's been a pleasure.
Yeah, thank you very much. It's been really fun. It's always fun talking to passionate nerds, I think. So that's good.
You certainly got me thinking differently and creatively, Patrick, in terms of how to leverage different stakeholder groups. So good stuff.
That would be great. Yeah, to be continued, I hope.
100%.
You have a deal. All right.
All right, great.
Good stuff. All right. Thanks, Patrick. Cheers, Will.
Thank you very much.
Take care, Patrick.
Soon. Thank you.
Be well. Bye.